The forest was dark and heavy with silence. The moon hid behind broken clouds, and the wind carried the smell of ash and blood. Among the twisted trees, something moved, a shadow within shadows. It was the predator. Its body was large, built for the hunt, muscles like stone, eyes sharp like knives. It moved without sound, every step measured, every breath controlled. To it, this world was nothing but a place of prey. It had killed here before and would kill again. The predator had no mercy and no pity. It understood only the rule of the strong. The strong must eat, the weak must fall. That was the law it lived by, the law that had kept its kind alive for countless ages. Yet this night was not like others. This night, the predator saw something it could not understand. In the small clearing ahead, beside the faint glow of fire, there was a human. The predator knew humans. Fragile creatures. No claws, no armor, no teeth to tear. Weak bodies that bled quickly, soft skin that broke under pressure. And yet, humans had a strange way of surviving. They built tools, they worked together, and they refused to surrender, even when weaker creatures should have died. The predator crouched low, its glowing eyes fixed on the sight before it. The human was not alone. Around the fire sat two small cubs. They were not human cubs. Their shapes, their ears, their skin, everything about them was different. They were the young of the predator's own kind. The human was feeding them, placing food carefully near their small mouths. The cubs looked at the human with wide eyes, trusting, helpless. The predator's claws twitched. It did not understand. Why would a human protect enemy young? Why would it feed them instead of killing them or leaving them to die? The human leaned back, exhausted, but its eyes never left the cubs. It kept watch over them, as if they were its own children. The predator stayed hidden. It could kill the human now, take back the cubs, and carry them to its den. That would be the natural choice. That would be the path of the hunter. But something held it still. Instead of striking, it watched. The human stretched its thin arms, reached for a small piece of firewood, and added it to the flames. Sparks rose into the night, lighting the human's face for a moment. It was tired, wounded perhaps, yet it did not sleep. It stayed awake to guard the young. The predator tilted its head. This did not make sense. It remembered how its own kind raised cubs. The strong would protect their young? Yes, but only their own blood. If a cub was weak or lost, it was left behind. There was no place for weakness in the life of a hunter. But this human cared for cubs, not of its blood, cubs that belonged to a species that should have been its enemy. The predator's tail flicked once. Hunger gnawed at its stomach, but curiosity gnawed harder at its mind. What was this creature doing? The firelight reflected in the predator's eyes as it drew a little closer. Still, the human did not notice. The cubs made soft noises, little growls that were more like whimpers. The human hushed them gently. It touched their heads with its hand, and the cubs leaned into the touch. That small act struck the predator like a blow. Kindness was not something it expected to see in this place. Kindness was not part of the hunt. The predator's breath came slow and steady, but inside, confusion spread. Was this weakness? Or was this some hidden strength humans carried? The predator could not decide. It only knew one thing. It must keep watching. Time passed. The fire burned low. The human finally leaned against a log, holding the cubs close, wrapping them in pieces of cloth. The predator felt the urge again to strike. A single leap, a slash of claws, and it would all be over. But something deep inside stopped it. For the first time in its life, the predator did not follow the law of the strong. It did not kill. It only stared, silent in the shadows, its heart beating with questions it could not answer. Why protect what is not yours? Why fight for the weak? Why give when you gain nothing? The predator's kind did not think this way. But the human did. The predator sank lower into the darkness, its eyes never leaving the fire. It told itself it was waiting for the right moment. It told itself the human was nothing but prey. Yet in truth, it wanted to see more. The human had broken the law of the hunt, and somehow the world did not fall apart. The cubs lived. The fire burned. And for the first time in many hunts, the predator felt something close to doubt. The night deepened, the wind howled through the broken trees, and still the predator watched. It whispered in its mind, words it never thought it would think. This does not make sense. Days passed in silence, and still the predator watched. From its place in the trees, hidden by shadow and scent, it studied the strange human every hour, every movement. The human rose each morning with tired eyes, yet it never abandoned the cubs. It hunted for food with crude tools, setting traps with vines and sticks, collecting berries and roots, returning always with something for the little ones. The predator expected failure. It expected weakness. Yet the human returned, limping at times, bleeding at times, but never empty-handed. The cubs ate because the human willed them to eat. At night, the fire burned again, smoke rising into the broken sky, and the human told soft stories to the cubs, sounds without meaning to the predator's ears, yet carrying warmth all the same. The cubs leaned close, comforted by the sound, their small eyes heavy with trust. The predator's claws dug into the bark of the tree as it watched. Why? Why would a creature waste its strength on young that were not its own? The human's body was weak, its skin scarred, its muscles thin. Every bite of food it gave to the cubs was a bite it did not eat itself. Still it smiled when the cubs played. Still it laughed softly when they stumbled and rolled in the dirt. The predator compared this sight to its own kind. It remembered its people, cold and sharp, raising cubs with discipline, with harshness. The young learned to fight quickly or they perished. That was the way of survival. Never had the predator seen a parent offer laughter. Never had it seen a protector give food to another while starving itself. The more it watched, the more uneasy it grew. The law of the strong was clear. Protect your own. Take what you need. Never waste time on others. But here was a fragile human breaking every law and yet surviving. The predator's hunger grew, but it could not attack. Curiosity chained in place. It thought of the moment it would finally kill the human. It imagined the strike, the cubs crying out, the fire going dark. But every time it prepared to move, its body refused. Something invisible held it back, something it did not yet understand. One evening, rain fell heavy from the sky. The fire hissed and died, and the clearing turned to mud. The cubs shivered and cried, their small bodies shaking from the cold. The predator expected the human to give up, to leave them to die. Instead, the human pulled them close, wrapping them in its thin cloak, shielding them with its own body. For hours the human lay in the rain, trembling, coughing, but never letting go of the cubs. The predator felt its chest tighten with a strange new feeling. Was this bravery or madness? The storm raged, but when morning came, the cubs were alive, sleeping safe against the human's chest. The human's lips were blue, its face pale, yet its eyes opened when danger stirred, scanning the forest with sharpness that no weakness could explain. The predator turned away, unsettled. It had killed many creatures in its life, yet none had made it hesitate as this human did. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. The human taught the cubs to walk farther, to carry small sticks, to drink from streams. It scolded them when they strayed too far, but its scolding carried no claws, only firm guidance. At night, when the cubs slept, the human sat awake, staring into the flames with empty eyes, whispering words the predator could not hear. There was sorrow in that gaze, sorrow deeper than hunger or pain. The predator wondered what loss the human carried, what wound drove it to guard children that were not its own. Curiosity gnawed harder now than hunger. The predator felt like prey itself, trapped by questions, unable to escape. On the fourth night, a sound broke the silence. The howl of scavenger beasts echoed in the forest. The cubs woke, frightened, and the human rose, gripping a sharpened stick. The predator narrowed its eyes. Surely now the truth would show. The human would run, abandon the cubs, save its own life. That was the natural way. But the human did not run. It stood between the cubs and the sound. Every muscle ready though held only a simple stick. The predator's eyes widened in the dark. Foolish human, it thought. Foolish, but unbroken. The scavenger beasts drew closer, glowing eyes appearing at the edge of the firelight. The cubs whimpered, clinging to each other. The human raised its stick higher, jaw clenched, eyes burning with something the predator had never seen in prey. The predator leaned forward, breath slow, heart beating with a question it could not silence. Why does this fragile creature refuse to run? Why does it risk death for children that are not its blood? The predator, master of the hunt, felt its own certainty crack like thin ice. This human was not prey. This human was something else. And as the beasts howled again, the predator whispered in its mind, "This does not make sense." The night was alive with danger. The scavenger beasts crept from the shadows, their bodies low, their teeth shining in the firelight. Their growls rumbled deep, a chorus of hunger echoing through the trees. The predator knew these beasts well. They were carrion eaters, hunters of weakness, always circling the edge of death. Alone, they were nothing, but in packs they could strip flesh from bone in minutes. The predator crouched in silence, hidden, eyes fixed on the human. This was the moment it had been waiting for. The weak always showed their truth when danger came. The human would flee, abandon the cubs, save its own skin. That was the way of survival. Yet the human did not move. It stood tall, though its body trembled. It raised its crude stick, holding it like a spear, its eyes burning with fire brighter than the flames before it. The cubs whimpered behind, their tiny claws clutching at the human's cloak, but the human only glanced once to make sure they were close. The scavenger beasts stepped forward, slow, testing. Their yellow eyes glowed with hunger. They circled the fire, snarling, snapping at the night air. One leapt forward and the human shouted, a sound filled with rage and defiance, thrusting the stick into the beast's side. The creature screamed, twisting back into the dark, bleeding from a wound. The predator's eyes widened. This was no flight, no surrender. The human had chosen a fight. Another beast lunged, jaws snapping for the cubs, but the human threw itself in the way, taking the bite on its arm. Blood sprayed across the dirt, but still the human held the stick with its other hand, slamming it into the beast's face until it fell back howling. The cubs cried out, terrified but alive. The predator's claws dug into the bark of its perch. It wanted to move, to strike, to finish the battle, but something stopped it. It wanted to see how far the human could go. The pack grew restless, angry now, circling tighter, their growls echoing like thunder. The human's breath came hard, its blood dripping fast, yet it stood unbroken. With every step the beasts took, the human stepped forward, shielding the cubs. It shouted again, a sound not of prey, but of a creature daring death to come closer. The predator had seen warriors of its own kind fight with skill, with weapons, with discipline. But this was something else. This was raw will, a force the predator could not name. A smaller beast tried to dart past, and the human caught it with both hands, wrestling it to the ground, stabbing with broken wood until it lay still. The predator felt its chest tighten. This was not possible. A human should not survive this. Yet here it was standing, bleeding but still fighting. The largest beast finally charged, bigger than the rest, stronger, its roar shaking the clearing. The human faced it without stepping back. For one heartbeat, the predator thought the human would fall. But then, in a move born not of strength but of desperation, the human dropped low, driving the burning end of a branch into the beast's open jaws. Fire met flesh, and the creature screamed in agony, stumbling into the darkness. The pack hesitated, their courage broken. One by one they turned, fleeing back into the forest, their cries fading into silence. The clearing was still again. The fire burned low, the rain dripping from leaves above. The human staggered, its body shaking, its arm torn and bleeding. It collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. Yet even in that moment, even at the edge of collapse, its eyes turned to the cubs. It reached out, touched their heads, whispered soft words the predator could not hear. The cubs pressed against it, trembling, their small bodies safe only because the human had stood. The predator watched, its heart thundering with confusion. This should not have been possible. No weak creature should have survived such a trial. No prey should have faced death and refused to fall. The predator had seen bravery before, yes, but always for one's own kind, one's own blood. This human had no reason, no duty to the cubs, yet it had bled for them, nearly died for them. The predator's claws trembled, and it felt something it had never known: hesitation. Its instincts screamed to finish the hunt, to claim the cubs, to end the human before it grew too dangerous. But another voice, quiet yet unshakable, whispered inside its mind. This human is different. The predator lowered its body back into the shadows, silent, unseen. Its hunger gnawed at its belly, but its thoughts gnawed deeper. It did not strike. It did not kill. It only stared at the fragile, bleeding figure, surrounded by cubs that were not its own, and it whispered again the words that had haunted it since the first night. This does not make sense. The night after the battle was heavy with silence. The fire crackled low, its weak flames casting long shadows across the clearing. The human sat slumped against a log, its arm wrapped with torn cloth, blood still seeping slowly through the bandage. The cubs pressed close to it, their small heads resting on its chest, their eyes shut in uneasy sleep. The predator watched from the trees, hidden as always, its mind torn in ways it had never known before. Instinct screamed that this was the moment to strike. The human was wounded, exhausted, weaker than ever. A simple leap, a swift slash, and the human would fall. The cubs would be free, and the predator would carry them away as it should have from the beginning. That was the law. That was survival. But when the predator's muscles tensed to spring, its body froze. Something inside would not move, something deep and heavy, a weight pressing against the law of the hunt. It had seen the human stand against the pack of beasts, had seen it bleed and fight when no creature should have lived. It had seen the fire in its eyes, not the fire of anger or instinct, but the fire of choice. The human had chosen to protect the cubs. That thought burned inside the predator like a wound. Choice was not a word its kind used. They acted as they were born to act. The strong killed. The weak died. Nothing more. Yet the human was rewriting those rules with every breath it took. The predator tilted its head, studying. The human's face was pale, sweat dripping from its brow, but its hands still rested over the cubs, ready to shield them even in sleep. The predator remembered its own cubs, small and fragile ones. It remembered the lessons of its people. If one is weak, leave it behind, for weakness threatens the whole. It had followed that law. It had watched weak siblings die, and it felt nothing. That was the way of survival. But now, watching this fragile human cling to life only to guard cubs, not of its blood, the predator felt a sharp sting of doubt. Was it wrong all along? Or was the human simply mad, breaking the order of the universe? The predator's claws scraped against bark. Hunger twisted its gut, but curiosity twisted harder. It wanted to see more. The human stirred, coughing hard, waking with pain. It rose slowly, feeding the cubs scraps of roasted meat left from the night before. Its hand shook, but it smiled at them, a tired smile filled with something the predator could not name. Warmth, maybe. Hope. The predator blinked. Hope was not for prey. Hope was not for hunters. And yet, here it was, filling the air like smoke from the fire. The predator imagined walking into the clearing, taking the cubs in its arms, ending the human in one strike. But another vision appeared, unwanted, the cubs crying, clinging to the human, refusing to let go. The predator snarled under its breath. It was absurd. It was against nature. Yet the thought of those cubs mourning the human filled it with an unease sharper than hunger. Why? Why should it matter? The predator had killed countless times, without hesitation, without regret. Why should this be different? The human lifted one cub gently, placing it on its shoulders, laughing softly despite its pain. The cub squealed in delight, reaching for the sky with tiny claws. The other cub clapped its hands, copying the sound of the laugh. The predator's chest tightened. It had never seen cubs of its kind laugh like that. It had never heard joy in their voices. They were raised in fear, in hardness, in silence. But here, under the care of a weak human, they found joy. The predator lowered its head. It did not understand. It remembered the words it had told itself before. This does not make sense. And now, those words felt heavier than ever. As the sun rose, painting the sky red and gold, the human began teaching the cubs to walk in small circles, guiding their steps with patience. It clapped when they succeeded, steadied them when they stumbled, never scolding with anger, only with firm but gentle hands. The predator's mind swirled. It should have hated this. It should have ended this. But instead it watched, fascinated, unable to turn away. For the first time in its long life, the predator did not know if it was strong or weak. For the first time, it doubted its own laws. And as the cubs ran clumsily into the human's arms, falling into laughter and warmth, the predator felt something it had never felt before. Respect. It did not strike that morning. It did not reveal itself. It only whispered inside its mind, a whisper filled with confusion and fear. Is this weakness, or is this strength beyond my kind? The days passed, and the human grew weaker. The wound on its arm festered, the skin swollen and red. Yet still it rose each morning, still it fed the cubs, still it guarded them through the night. The predator saw the sickness spreading, saw the way the human coughed and shivered, yet it never stopped. The cubs grew stronger, learning to walk steadier, to eat more on their own, but without the human, they would not survive. The predator's hunger burned, but another hunger now gnawed deeper, a hunger for understanding. Why did this fragile being refuse to give in? Why did it keep giving pieces of itself until there was nothing left? On the third night of sickness, the human collapsed beside the fire, its body trembling, unable to rise. The cubs whimpered and pressed against it, trying to wake it, their small cries piercing the silent forest. The predator crouched in the dark, its claws twitching. This was the end. If the human died, the cubs would die too. That was the order of things. Yet something inside the predator twisted, a pressure it could not ignore. For reasons it could not name, it leapt from the shadows and vanished into the deeper woods. It hunted. It killed. When dawn came, the human stirred weakly, its eyes opening to find fresh meat lying at the edge of the camp. It looked around, confused, but no creature revealed itself. It cooked the meat slowly, fed the cubs first, and only after they were full did it take a small bite for itself. The predator watched from the trees, hidden, its breath heavy. It had never shared a kill before. It had never left food for another. Yet here it had done so, and the world had not ended. The human's eyes lifted toward the forest, lingering on the shadows, and for a brief moment, the predator wondered if it knew. The bond was not spoken, not shown, yet grew stronger each day. More times the predator hunted and left food nearby, never approaching, never allowing the human to see, but always watching as the human accepted the gift without question. It became a silent agreement, an unspoken connection. The cubs began to grow faster, their steps more steady, their claws sharper, their eyes brighter. The human taught them games, tossing sticks for them to chase, laughing when they clumsily tripped. The sound of that laugh filled the clearing, strange and warm, a sound the predator's kind never made. The cubs responded with joy, growling softly in play, tumbling over each other, clinging to the human with trust that seemed unshakable. The predator's chest tightened every time it saw this. The cubs were not meant to be this way. They were meant to be trained with fear, hardened by discipline, shaped into hunters. Yet here they were, learning joy instead of fear, love instead of obedience. And somehow they were thriving. The predator wondered, is this how humans raise their young? Is this why they survive even though they are weak? The question gnawed at it like a wound. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the human sat with the cubs beside the fire, its body still weak, but its voice calm. It spoke in soft tones, words the predator could not understand, but the cubs listened with wide eyes, as if hearing stories meant only for them. The human's hand rested on each of their heads, a gesture of comfort, and the cubs leaned close as if the touch itself was life. The predator shifted in the darkness, unsettled. Why did it feel something stir within its chest? Why did it feel pride, as though it too was part of this strange family? The predator shook its head, baring its fangs in frustration. It was the hunter. It was not prey. It was not family. Yet the longer it watched, the more that truth began to blur. On the fifth night, the human's sickness worsened. It could barely rise, its body shaking with fever. The cubs whimpered, pressing close, refusing to leave its side. The predator crept closer than ever before, its eyes glowing in the firelight, unseen by the human, but close enough to hear its ragged breathing. It wanted to walk into the clearing, to end this fragile life before it collapsed on its own. Its claws stayed still. Instead, it moved silently to the edge, dropped another kill in the dirt, and slipped back into the trees. The human's head lifted weakly, its eyes searching the shadows. For the first time, its lips curved in a faint smile, as if it understood. It whispered something soft, words too low to hear, and the predator felt its heart hammer against its ribs. This was not the way of hunters. This was not the law of the strong. And yet, as the cubs curled against the human and the firelight flickered on their small faces, the predator realized something it could no longer deny. It wanted the human to live. Not for the cubs, not for survival, but because somewhere in the darkness of its soul, the predator had begun to care. The forest grew restless as days passed, and the predator felt the change before the human did. The air carried new scents, sharp and bitter, the smell of blood and metal, the smell of its own kind. Others had come. These were not scavenger beasts or wild hunters. These were soldiers of its species, trained killers, stronger, faster, relentless. They were searching, and the predator knew why. They were looking for the missing cubs. The human had no idea what danger approached. It still played with the young by the fire, still fed them scraps, still told them soft stories as if the world outside was not closing in. But the predator's heart grew heavy. It knew what was coming, and it knew the human could not stand against it. The night arrived when the threat revealed itself. From the shadows beyond the trees came the sound of heavy footsteps, claws scraping stone, low growls that carried discipline instead of hunger. 3 figures appeared, tall and armored in the hides of beasts, their eyes glowing like coals. The cubs stiffened, sensing their kin, but pressed against the human in fear. The human rose, holding only a sharpened stick, eyes wide with both fear and determination. The predator crouched higher in the branches, every muscle tense. It should have felt relief. Its kind had come. They would reclaim the cubs, restore order. Yet what it felt instead was dread. The soldiers stepped into the clearing, their voices harsh as they barked in their own tongue. They demanded the cubs. They pointed at the human with contempt, laughing at the sight of a fragile creature daring to protect what was not its own. The human stood tall, its body still weak from sickness, yet its stance unbroken. It placed itself between the cubs and the soldiers, raising the stick like a weapon, though it knew it was nothing. The predator's claws gripped the branch, torn between instinct and something new. If it revealed itself now, it would be marked as traitor. Yet if it stayed silent, the human would die, the cubs would be torn from warmth into cold hands. The soldiers advanced, their laughter fading into growls. One reached for the cubs, and the human struck, jabbing the stick against armor. It barely scratched, but the human's eyes burned with fury. The soldiers snarled and shoved it aside, and the cubs cried out. That sound pierced the predator deeper than any claw. In that moment, something broke. With a roar that split the night, the predator leapt from the trees, crashing into the clearing with claws flashing. The soldiers froze in shock as their own kin struck at them, ripping into the first with a strike that sent blood spraying across the fire. The second soldier roared back, slashing with its blade, but the predator spun, driving it into the dirt with force that cracked bones. The human staggered in shock, eyes wide, but when the third soldier lunged, it too raised its stick and thrust forward, jamming it into the soldier's throat. The blow did not kill, but it stunned long enough for the predator to strike, tearing the enemy down. Silence followed, broken only by the crackling fire and the cub's frightened cries. The predator stood heaving, blood dripping from its claws, its eyes glowing in the firelight. The humans stared at it, trembling, yet not running. For the first time, their eyes met without shadows between them. The predator saw fear, yes, but also something else, trust. The cubs ran to the human, clinging to its legs, but they also looked at the predator with wide eyes that carried no fear. They saw not just a hunter, but a protector. The predator turned, staring at the broken bodies of its kin, the loss shattered by its own hand. It had chosen. It had fought beside the human, not against it. It should have felt shame, but instead it felt something far heavier, pride. The human sank to its knees, exhausted, and the predator moved closer, placing itself beside the fire. For the first time, it did not hide in the dark. The cubs pressed close to both of them, their small forms caught between two worlds. The predator's breath came heavy as it whispered inside its mind the truth it could no longer deny. The human had trusted it. The cubs had trusted it. And for the first time in its life, the predator had trusted back. The clearing was quiet after the battle, but the silence was heavy, not peaceful. The bodies of the fallen soldiers lay twisted in the dirt, their blood feeding the ground, their eyes staring lifeless into the firelight. The predator stood over them, its chest rising and falling like a storm, claws dripping with the proof of its choice. The human sat weakly near the fire, its arms still bleeding, its body shivering with exhaustion, yet its eyes never left the cubs. They clung to it, trembling but alive, safe because both hunter and human had fought together. For a long moment, no one moved, the air thick with smoke and questions that had no answers. The predator turned its gaze to the human, and the human returned the stare, their eyes meeting across the flames. In that silence, something passed between them, not words, not even sound, but a bond stronger than any spoken vow. The predator knew what it had done. It had betrayed its own kind. It had broken the law of the strong, the law written in blood and bone for generations. No member of its species would forgive this. It had chosen weakness, chosen something that made no sense. Yet as it looked at the cubs curled against the human's chest, their small eyes closing in safety, it realized it did not care. The cubs were alive, and they were not afraid. That was enough. The human coughed hard, its body shaking, and for a moment it seemed it might fall unconscious. The predator stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, not as a hunter, but as something else. The human did not move away. It simply looked up, eyes filled with both fear and trust, then lowered its head in exhaustion. The predator lowered itself beside the fire, a shape of shadow and fang resting near a fragile being it should have killed long ago. The cubs blinked at the sight, then reached small hands toward the predator, touching its rough skin with innocence. The predator felt their warmth and did not pull away. It had killed many times, had felt blood on its claws, but never had it felt this. Never had it felt the strange weight of being chosen, of being trusted, of being part of something beyond survival. That night passed with the predator awake, guarding the camp, its eyes scanning the forest for more threats, while the human and cubs slept safely under its watch. When dawn came, painting the sky gold, the predator thought of its people. It thought of the law it had broken, the judgment that would come if they found it, but also thought of the human, broken and bleeding yet still alive, and of the cubs that laughed and played even in the ruins of a cruel world. It thought of the fire, of warmth, of trust, and slowly it realized a truth that shook its soul. The strong were not those who killed the most, who feared nothing, who crushed weakness. True strength was something else. True strength was what it saw in the human. The will to protect even when weak, to care even when hopeless, to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The predator lowered its head, a growl deep in its throat, but it was not the growl of anger or hunger. It was the growl of understanding. The human stirred awake, eyes tired but sharp, and for a moment they stared at one another again. The human gave a faint nod, small but real, as if acknowledging what had changed. The predator returned the gesture, the smallest bow of its head, the first sign of respect it had ever given to prey. But it knew now the human was not prey. The human was something far more dangerous. The predator thought of the future. Its kind would come again. More soldiers would search for the cubs. The law would demand blood for betrayal. It would be hunted as traitor, and the human would be hunted as thief. Yet even knowing this, it felt no regret. It had seen a truth that could not be unseen. It had felt a bond that could not be broken. The cubs woke, yawning, climbing clumsily into the arms of both human and predator, as if choosing them both. And in that moment, in the quiet of morning, the predator understood that it was no longer alone, no longer only a hunter. It was something else now, something new. The fire cracked, the wind carried the scent of the world beyond, and the predator whispered words in its mind, words that echoed like thunder against all it had ever believed. The human raised what I could not, and in protecting them, it raised me as well.